Now, it is now time for our weekly segment, Race in America, with correspondent Ashley Banks. She's going to discuss some incidents affecting minorities across the country. Ashley, what's on the docket today?
Hey there, Manila. Today on Race in America, we'll be focusing on two stories in which it appears police officers use excessive force. First up, let's go to Minneapolis, Minnesota, where Police Chief Janae Hart resigned just days after receiving backlash from the public and City Council following the fatal shooting of 40-year-old Australian native Justine Damon. Damon had moved from Australia to Minneapolis to be with her fiance. But tragedy struck on July 15, 2017. On that day, Damon called 911 to report a possible assault near her home. When officers arrived, they claim they were startled by a loud noise, and then Officer Mohammed Noor fired his gun from the passenger side through the driver's side, hitting and killing Damon. Damon's death sparked outrage worldwide, prompting Minneapolis Mayor Betsy Hodges to put out a statement saying, quote, "As far as we have come, I've lost confidence in the chief's ability to lead us further. For us to continue to transform policing and community trust and policing, we need new leadership at MPD." Hart was the first woman and openly gay Minneapolis police chief. She served a total of 4.5 years in the position. Residents are now calling on the mayor to resign. Joining me now to discuss this further is Samantha Pree-Stinson, activist and the Green Party endorsed City Council candidate for Minneapolis 3rd Ward, and Michael Wood, police management expert and former Baltimore police officer. Thank you both for joining me. I'm going to address this first question to you, Samantha. Black Lives Matter protesters in Minneapolis, they pushed the mayor to do something in the wake of Philando Castile's death, and nothing happened. So why, in your opinion, did the mayor ask the police chief to step down after Justine was killed?
So actually what we've seen, the verdict of Philando, what we saw was beyond just Black Lives Matter's Twin Cities. What we saw was some intersectional coalition building across pretty much all the groups that have been working for police reform and bringing up these issues of police brutality. And we all came together, some even candidates all came together for a common cause to stop talking about the differences and to start focusing on the sameness, and that these issues are affecting all of us. And yes, it did take the death of a white woman to really take it to this global level that we're seeing of interest. However, despite that fact, and to remain from being polarized, the bigger issue is that this coalition of groups, intersectional, all came together to demand that we have new leadership within our police department. And we saw that with the rally and the march that was led to City Hall, where the mayor actually locked us all out. And eventually the doors were opened, and you saw the open calls for her to resign as well, and for a new leadership to lead our city.
Michael, as a former police officer, in your opinion, why don't we see this more often where police chiefs are stepping down, even when the DOJ investigations that came out for like Chicago and Baltimore, and they were showing police departments actively engaging and participating in practices using excessive force? Why don't we see this regularly?
I mean, I don't know exactly why, but I would imagine we have to be looking at some of these issues where we won't actually change the system doing that. And maybe subconsciously these mayors know this, and we know this as a whole, but even replacing these faces, while we do have to replace the faces, we have to get down to the system of what is happening. If you replace a police chief with the next person up, that was the right-hand man or woman the entire time, so you end up with the same system on, and that's an Orwellian escalation. So it's easy for the mayor to see in Justine Damon how that can really affect her and give her an empathy level to make her step up and do something. What we have to do is change the system so that the system reflects that empathy beyond just those few people that we can recognize.
And Michael, in saying that the system does need to be changed, the officer Mohammed Noor, he was a Somalian native, and it was speculated that he joined the force, or he was accepted onto the force in order to help build that relationship and the trust between the community. But is that the answer?
No, I mean, fundamentally, policing comes from the oppressed classes. They are given more resources to jump up from being poor into like an upper middle class. So by finding more oppressed people and giving them power, you don't change the system. We just become the oppressors ourselves.
Samantha, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Well, you mentioned something really important with the DOJ report, and here in Minneapolis, we actually had one as well after the wake of the Jamar Clark incident, where we saw local community all coming together, again, intersectional coalition coming together at the 4th Precinct. And instead of our leadership, not just our local leadership, but our state leadership and at the time, the existing Minneapolis Police Department leadership, again, a lack of communication and a lack of a willingness to be able to not only actively listen to the community, but partner with them to put all solutions on the table and again, not these surface, just treating the symptom remedies, but actually getting to the root cause of the issues and planting some new seeds that we cultivate that include the communities that are being affected by these injustices. And with the DOJ report, there was actually 36 findings. Those findings have been on the desk of our leadership for the last 7 months, and we have not seen we've seen little to no action. We have not seen it prioritized. We haven't seen it discussed. And we're in the middle of an election year where we're getting ready to, November 7th, elect a new mayor, as well as 13 city council seats. It's not a very popular thing to talk about. It's not something that necessarily will get you votes. So we still have seen, even in, to speak to his point, talking about bringing in new faces, it's not enough. We need new faces who have the cultural competence and the understanding to know that this is a systemic issue, and it's going to take much more than just resurfacing to really get to the bottom of these issues, make them a priority, and really change the face of policing so that it works for our community here, boots on the grounds in Minneapolis.
All right, Samantha, I want to jump into what usually happens after an unarmed person is shot by a police officer. Now, we know in the case of Justine, she was painted as a lovely woman who people were saying didn't deserve to be killed. But in your opinion, does it appear that when minorities are killed by law enforcement, it seems like law enforcement and the media, they work hand in hand to criminalize victims instead of focusing on the tragic event that took place?
Absolutely. And what we've seen is we've had the police union has jumped up right away in defense of the officers before any evidence comes out, yet they tell the community to be patient and wait and let the system work when we already know that the system fails us because the system is broken and needs to be replaced with something that works. And in the case that recently happened, we also saw the mayor come out and say it shouldn't have happened. We saw the prior police chief, Janine Harto, say the same thing. But when it's been somebody who's been of color, whether they've been Native or Black or African American, however you want to put that identity forward, we've seen the exact opposite. So it's polarized these racial issues within the city, and it's added to them. And the skepticism that people see on the outside looking in, where it seems like people are looking to make it about race, they fail to understand the direct comparisons side by side that we've seen time and time again that are leading people to feel this way. And so we can't deny people's realities and say that they're being unreasonable. These are things that are actual and factual that are happening here. But even with Justine Demond, what we've seen is now she's also being, they're trying to find reasons to paint her to be not the person that she was. Victims have absolutely no rights. There's no reason why now they're saying she slapped the car, and they served a search warrant on her home looking for bodily fluids. Well, of course her bodily fluids are going to be there, and I don't know what they expected to find, the hand that slapped the car. It's absolutely ridiculous, and we need rights for our victims and rights for those families, regardless of what color they are. And when it comes to this polarization of, well, what about the officer, it wasn't a white officer this time, and he's going to be the fall guy and be made the example of, that might very well be the case, but it doesn't change the fact that this officer did what he did, and he does need to be prosecuted. But it does bring up a larger issue of the polarized racism that's happening not only in Minneapolis but across the nation.
And like you're saying, Samantha, a lot of people would agree with you, saying that a lot of times law enforcement and the media, they try to find ways to justify these killings. Michael and Samantha, I want to turn your attention to a man who was fatally shot by police officers in Mississippi this week after the officers showed up at the wrong house. The officers were supposed to arrive at 5878 Surrey Lane, but ended up across the street at 5881 Surrey Lane. As a result of this, a man lost his life. Michael, it appears the officers didn't take the time to analyze the address. Are officers just not trained properly?
Well, we're not trained properly, but I don't want to get into that. It is if we were trained properly, what would we be training properly to do? To mask our fascism, to mask our oppression as much as possible. That's what police best practices are. Best practices would be getting Freddie Gray to the prison cell to go into an inhumane system without being hurt in the van. Those aren't actual reforms. We have to be very careful about looking at those things in reform. The problem is that we have a drug war going on, and we have a police force that continues in an Orwellian escalation to do raids in people's houses, risking both those people and the police officers' lives themselves. So going forward, we have to keep our mind that what we are doing is we are fighting sometimes over asking who will protect it, or who will lead us and who will police us, when we should be determining ourselves how we will be policed versus. Does that make sense to you?
It makes a lot of sense. Thank you so much. Yeah. We're going to have to leave it there. That was Samantha Pree-Stinson, activist and the Green Party endorsed city council candidate for Minneapolis 3rd Ward, and Michael Wood, police management expert and former Baltimore police officer. Thank you both. That's it for Race in America. Be sure to follow me on Twitter at @AshleyBanks_RT. Don't forget to question more. Back to you, Manila.
Thank you, Ashley.